Hello and welcome. I'm Ashwin Ahmed, opinion editor of SNI, and I'm speaking here to Dr. Adil Rashid, counterterrorism expert and research fellow at IDSA. Today, we are going to be focusing on ISIS post the Sri Lanka attacks. Dr. Rashid, post the Sri Lanka attacks and the fact that Baghdadi appeared in a video post the attacks, do you feel that now this signals the failure of President Trump's declared war on ISIS?
I think President Trump's declaration in December last year was itself followed by certain people within the Pentagon. There was also a report which said that ISIS, if the pressure is not applied, could have a resurgence. And so after that, President Trump also suggested that if the threat becomes bigger, he might reconsider his position. Having said that, the Sri Lanka attacks has really come as a big setback for the international campaign. And I think the coming back of Baghdadi after 5 years, giving a video message, shows that he has overcome the shock that his caliphate is now being wiped out, and he is back onto a public relations offensive. He wants to show himself as the leader once again, because probably after his core leadership and the headquarters of ISIS was wiped out, there could have been other contenders for whatever remains of that unit. It is very interesting to see that ISIS has now been helped by its affiliates, and this generally happens with many terror hubs. What happened with Al-Qaeda in 2001 when its base was decimated in Afghanistan, bin Laden went into hiding, and it was the affiliates. Someone did a bombing in Bali and other attacks. And so it is a time when there is a transition. So earlier, Al-Qaeda was funding and training and masterminding the attacks. And then when it was in trouble, its affiliates came to its rescue. And probably we are seeing the same happening here with the Sri Lanka bombings. ISIS finds that it could use that to re-emerge on the global stage.
I just now want to come to the South Asian region. We have ISIS activity apart from Sri Lanka in the Maldives, in Bangladesh, and in parts of Pakistan. But so far, India has not seen a major ISIS activity. What are the reasons you think for that, and do you think that could change in the near future?
I think we like to commend ourselves, and rightly so, that relatively the amount of ISIS radicalization has not affected us. There have been 200 people who left from Maldives, only barely 100 from here. However, I think that we need to take the threat seriously, even now. And in the study of terrorism, even if you don't have any objective data to support the rise of a particular group, one should always be wary of that. One doesn't know when and where a terror attack can happen, and the situation might change dramatically.
Dr. Rashid, do you feel radicalization could happen now?
I think there were many theories which were floated why there was not the kind of radicalization in India as we saw in other parts of the world to that extent. And one of them was that the ISIS and Al-Qaeda brand of Islam, which is the Salafi Wahhabi, we don't have that brand of Islam here. We have the Deobandis and Barelvis. That is a more non-violent and more Sufi version of Islam. The other theory was that probably we have already dealt with the issue of Islamic State and political Islam. We had the question of Pakistan, which came up way back in 70 years back. It would not resonate as much in India as it might in the West. So despite all of these theories, there is also this thing that Al-Qaeda and ISIS, I believe, at that time, did not give too much importance to India. No matter how important we think of ourselves, it is primarily because Al-Qaeda wants to create spheres of influence, especially in the Muslim societies, from where it could launch attacks. That was not possible in the Indian context. Its version of extreme Islam and quite a different Islam. Indian Islam and Indian schools are quite different from the way Arab Islam is understood. We have our own set of Muslim scholars, Ashraf Thanvis and others. With few people here know about Ghazali or Ibn Taymiyyah. However, now I think that with ISIS becoming more desperate, trying to find help from wherever it gets, and also this probable the migration of its fighters to the Afpak region, the festering Kashmir problem, and this thing that there is probably growing tension in India, or the communal tension. The threat is there, and it can only increase. There is also a sense of helplessness and alienation, which in my few surveys I found among the Indian Muslims. They have gone very silent, which I do not like. And you find only the liberal Muslim expressing whatever real or perceived apprehensions they may have. But the mainstream Muslim community has not been very vocal about its opinions of what is going on. And this points to a kind of insidiousness, which I find very discomforting. So we can applaud ourselves as a society for not having fallen prey to radicalization until now, but we cannot rest on our laurels.
We are seeing a change in the narrative as far as the radicalized terrorist is concerned. Earlier, we used to look at them as people from an impoverished background who were turned to jihad by extremist literature. Now that narrative seems to have changed. Now we're seeing educated young men, and in some cases young women, turning towards terrorism and jihad. So that's my first question. Why do you think this narrative has changed? And the second part is, in Sri Lanka, we never saw any extremist Muslim activity for some years now. So why has that changed on the ground?
The first thing is that if you look at this whole narrative of the uneducated becoming more radicalized, it is only probably in the context of Afghanistan and Pakistan that this has been so. Because you had the jihadist factories, as you call them, the madrasas turned into factories of creating jihadis. And the level of education in Afghanistan and Pakistan being so low that you found terrorists coming from there. However, if you look at every other part of the world, you find terrorists to be coming from pretty decent backgrounds. You find most of the attackers of 9/11, you find subsequent attackers being from very good families, Bin Laden, Zawahiri, and all these people, coming from very well-to-do families. And the other thing is that if you want to have operatives in countries which are democratic and developed, you would not like to have people who are less educated. I think we need to change all that. The jihadis think themselves as revolutionaries, and generally revolutionaries read a lot, they think a lot. And jihadism has developed its own kind of a perverse narrative and a kind of ideology. And so there is, if you have a global scope, it necessitates you to have at least a modicum of understanding of geopolitics. So I think this whole idea that it's only hungry people willing to just put a belt on and blow themselves up is a bit overdone. When it comes to the other question of yours,
yes, Sri Lanka, we hadn't seen any extremist activity.
Even today, I would say that there are these very two small organizations, the National Tawheed Jamaat and the other JMI, which it is said they have conducted these attacks. And if you look at the scale of the damage done, it shows that probably it's a much bigger network of jihadists, which we don't know how deep the rot is. And now we have come to know that these people had affiliations even beyond the borders. Some of them went up to Kashmir. Just today there is this news. So I think it is not a Sri Lanka attack. It is when I read the news and I found out that Christians were targeted and the simultaneous attacks, it was more of a global jihadist organization sending out a message to the so-called crusaders, as they say it. So it had a global narrative writ large. It was not an attack on Sri Lanka. It was ISIS announcing its comeback and using probably the Christchurch attacks as an excuse for what it did.
The Sri Lankan government has now recently put a watch on madrasas. They've announced that. Do you fear or look at, some kind of backlash, at least in the South Asian region? And if so, what steps could it take?
That is something which the terrorist always likes, the backlash, the crackdown on civil liberties. And unfortunately, governments have to take at least a few measures for its own security to do it. So it is understandable. And so that in itself, however, sometimes triggers off the very things which we are trying to stop in the longer run, creates a kind of a mistrust between communities. So I think the politicians of the country would have to keep a watch on how far they go in this direction. The security concerns are genuine, but at the same time, how far society can take that kind of attention with it in the long run.
I just now want to broaden the narrative. For ISIS, we are seeing two very different kinds of challenges. In the West, we're seeing jihadists coming home and claiming to be reformed. In India and of course the South Asian region and Central Asia as well, we are seeing a flurry of jihadist activity. Now, how does the world come together to deal with all these challenges on ISIS? And is there some kind of global terrorism policy that we could form in this regard?
I think it will be too much to come up with a global terrorism policy, because the same set of measures will not be applicable everywhere, although there can be some commonalities in measures. The bigger thing is that we have to understand that we have to get our house in order. We have had a kind of a social systems and political systems where communal tensions and playing politics with communalism, sometimes by all kinds of political organizations and parties, was game. We have to put that to an end, because the stakes are very high. It is an existential threat now. And I think that what needs to be done is that we need to have, especially when it comes to India, we need to come together as a society and as a country.
Right.
We need to put a stop to anything which could create fissures in society, because that is exactly what the outside enemy wants us to get into.
Dr. Rashid, thank you so much for sharing your views with us. I'm Ashwin Ahmed. Thank you for watching.